The scorching sun beat down on Quincy Hale's weathered face as he sat atop his horse at the edge of Copper Creek, watching the traveling fair roll into town unaware that his entire world was about to change with a single glance across the dusty fairgrounds. It was 1878, and Quincy had spent the last 15 years building a respectable cattle ranch just outside the growing settlement in the Wyoming Territory. At 35, he was known as a fair businessman, a skilled horseman, and a man who kept mostly to himself. Few knew the hollow ache that had never left his chest since that fateful spring of 1863 when his beloved Rebecca Caldwell had vanished from his life. Quincy adjusted his hat and nudged his horse forward. The fair's arrival promised a welcome distraction from the monotony of ranch life. Wagons adorned with brightly colored banners had formed a circle around the open field at the edge of town, and townsfolk were already gathering to witness the spectacle. "Mr. Hale," Sheriff Thompson called out, raising his hand in greeting as Quincy approached. "Good to see you in town. Thought you might be busy with that new herd." "Got Jameson handling things today," Quincy replied, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post. "Figured I'd see what all the commotion's about. Quite a show from what I hear. They've got acrobats, trick riders, fortune tellers, the works." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Enjoy yourself. Lord knows we could all use some entertainment around here." Quincy nodded and made his way through the growing crowd. Children darted between adults, their faces alight with excitement. Young couples strolled arm in arm, and the scent of sugar candy and roasted nuts filled the air. Despite himself, Quincy felt a spark of curiosity as he wandered among the stalls and attractions. Near the center of the fairground, a small arena had been constructed for horse demonstrations. A young woman in a striking blue riding outfit was guiding a dappled gray through an impressive series of maneuvers that had the crowd gasping and applauding. Something about her posture, the way she sat the horse with such natural grace, caught Quincy's attention. The rider couldn't have been more than 15, her honey-brown hair pulled back in a single braid that swung behind her as she guided the horse through its paces. When she turned in his direction, Quincy felt the air leave his lungs. Those eyes, a unique shade of amber with flecks of green, he'd only seen eyes like that on one other person. Rebecca. For a moment, he was transported back to 1863, to the rolling hills of his father's farm where he'd first met the schoolteacher with the copper hair and amber eyes. Rebecca Caldwell had arrived in their small Missouri town fresh from her education back east, full of ideas and dreams that fascinated the young rancher's son. Their love had bloomed quickly, intensely, in the shadow of the ongoing Civil War. Secret meetings by the creek, whispered promises under starlit skies, plans for a future together once the fighting stopped. But Rebecca's father, Judge Caldwell, had other ideas for his daughter. The judge disapproved of Quincy, a young man with no fortune and uncertain prospects. When Rebecca had come to him one spring evening, tears streaming down her face to tell him she was with child, they'd made plans to elope immediately. But before they could flee, Judge Caldwell had discovered their intentions and sent Rebecca away in the night, claiming she was returning to her aunt's home in Boston. Quincy had searched for months, writing letters that went unanswered, traveling as far as his meager savings would allow. Eventually, with the war intensifying and his father's health failing, he'd been forced to give up the search and focus on survival. Now, 15 years later, he stood frozen at the edge of a fairground arena, staring at a young rider who couldn't possibly be and yet, undeniably, was the child he'd never known. As the demonstration concluded and the crowd dispersed, Quincy found himself moving toward the exit where the riders were leading their horses. The girl was laughing with an older woman, her riding instructor perhaps, as she removed her gloves. "Excuse me," Quincy said, his voice rougher than intended. Both females turned to look at him, the girl with polite curiosity, the older woman with practiced wariness. "Can I help you, sir?" the woman asked, stepping slightly in front of the girl. The young lady rides beautifully, Quincy said, struggling to keep his voice steady. Reminded me of someone I used to know. The girl smiled, a familiar dimple appearing in her right cheek. Thank you, sir. I've been riding since I could walk. Rose, the woman said gently, go see to Tempest's cooling down, please. Rose. Even her name echoed Rebecca. Yes, Aunt Harriet, the girl replied, leading her horse away with a curious backward glance at Quincy. The woman Harriet fixed Quincy with a penetrating stare. I don't believe we've met, Mr. Hale, Quincy Hale. Something flickered in the woman's eyes, recognition, alarm. Mr. Hale. What exactly brings you to speak with my niece? Quincy removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. Madam, I don't mean to disturb you or the young lady. But I couldn't help noticing. She bears a striking resemblance to someone I once knew, a Rebecca Caldwell. Harriet's face paled. I think you'd better come with me, Mr. Hale, away from prying ears. She led him to a small, ornate wagon painted in deep blue with gold stars. Once inside, she closed the door firmly and turned to face him, arms crossed. Rebecca was my cousin, she said flatly. She passed away 6 years ago. The words hit Quincy like a physical blow. Dead, she's gone. Harriet nodded, her expression softening slightly at his evident distress. Consumption, it was quick at least. Quincy sank onto a small bench, his hat still clutched in his hands. And Rose is her daughter, Harriet confirmed. I've raised her since Rebecca's passing. She knows nothing of her father, only that he was someone Rebecca loved deeply before her father interfered. Judge Caldwell, Quincy murmured. He never did think I was good enough for her. So you are him, Harriet said, not a question. Rebecca described you often enough in her letters. She tried to find you after Rose was born, you know. Went back to Missouri, but your family farm had been sold and no one knew where you'd gone. The war, Quincy explained. My father died and I headed west with what little we had left, started over in Wyoming. He looked up at Harriet, his eyes burning. I searched for her too, for years. A silence fell between them, heavy with 15 years of missed opportunities and parallel journeys that never intersected. Does Rose know anything about me? Quincy finally asked. Only that her father was a young rancher with kind eyes and a dream of building something lasting, Harriet replied. Rebecca never spoke ill of you, not once. The knowledge was both a balm and a fresh wound. I'd like to meet her properly, I mean, if you think that would be all right. Harriet studied him for a long moment. Our troop will be in town for 2 weeks. I won't tell her who you are, not yet. But if you'd like to get to know her first, I won't stand in your way. Thank you, Quincy said, rising to his feet. I can't tell you what this means. I'm not doing it for you, Harriet said plainly. I'm doing it for Rose, and for Rebecca, who never stopped loving you. Over the next few days, Quincy found reasons to visit the fairground. He watched Rose's riding demonstrations, applauded her skills, and gradually introduced himself as a local rancher interested in fine horsemanship. Rose, friendly and open by nature, was happy to discuss her beloved Tempest and the techniques she'd learned in her years with the traveling show. On the 4th day, as Rose was brushing down her horse after a performance, Quincy ventured a more personal question. Have you always traveled with the fair, Miss Rose? She smiled, that familiar dimple appearing. Please, just Rose, and yes, for as long as I can remember. My mother was part of the troop too before she passed. I'm sorry about your mother, Quincy said sincerely. Rose nodded, her eyes momentarily distant. Aunt Harriet says I'm just like her, same eyes, same love of horses, she laughed softly. Same stubbornness too, apparently. She sounds like quite a woman, Quincy offered. She was, Rose agreed. The strongest, kindest person I've ever known. She paused in her brushing. Did you know my mother, Mr. Hale? You asked about her that first day. Quincy hesitated, aware that Harriet was watching them from nearby. I knew someone who reminds me of you a long time ago, before the war. Rose seemed to accept this vague answer, returning to her grooming. Have you always been a rancher? Not always, Quincy replied. I grew up on a farm in Missouri, came west after the war looking for a fresh start. Like in the dime novels, Rose said with a grin. The brave pioneer heading west to seek his fortune, Quincy chuckled. Considerably less exciting than those stories, I'm afraid. Mostly it's been hard work and more than a few mistakes along the way. But you built something lasting, Rose observed. Your own ranch, your own land. The echo of Harriet's words, a young rancher with a dream of building something lasting, wasn't lost on Quincy. Had Rebecca really remembered his dreams so clearly? Had she shared them with their daughter? Their conversations continued each day, growing longer and more comfortable. Rose shared stories of life with the traveling show, the different towns they'd visited, the friends she'd made along the way. Quincy told her about ranch life, his prized horses, the challenges and rewards of carving out an existence in the Wyoming Territory. A week into the fair's stay, Quincy invited Rose to visit his ranch. Harriet agreed to accompany her, her watchful eyes never far from the pair as Quincy showed them around his property. "This is magnificent," Rose breathed as they crested a hill overlooking the sprawling ranch. Quincy's herd grazed peacefully in the valley below, and the main house, modest but well-built, stood surrounded by cottonwood trees. "It's taken 15 years, Quincy said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Started with just 20 acres and 6 head of cattle. And now?" Harriet asked, genuinely curious. 500 acres and close to 300 head, Quincy replied. "Plus the horses, that's where my real passion lies." Rose's eyes lit up. "May I see them?" They rode down to the corral where Quincy's prized horses were kept. Rose moved among them with the same natural ease she showed with her performance horse, speaking softly and earning their trust within minutes. "She has a gift," Quincy said quietly to Harriet as they watched from the fence. "Just like her mother," Harriet agreed. After a pause, she added, "And her father, it seems." Quincy turned to her, a question in his eyes. "It's time, Mr. Hale," Harriet said. "She deserves to know who you are." That evening they sat in Quincy's modest parlor. Rose was examining a shelf of books, running her fingers over the spines with interest, while Harriet and Quincy exchanged meaningful glances. "Rose," Harriet finally said, "there's something Mr. Hale would like to discuss with you." The girl turned, curiosity on her face. "Is everything all right?" Quincy gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit down." Once she was seated, he took a deep breath. "Rose, when I first saw you riding at the fair, I noticed your eyes. They're quite distinctive amber with flecks of green." Rose touched her face self-consciously. "My mother's eyes." "Yes," Quincy nodded. "Rebecca's eyes." Rose stiffened. "You knew my mother's name was Rebecca." "I knew your mother," Quincy said gently. "Very well, in fact. We were in love back in Missouri before the war tore everything apart." Rose's gaze darted between Quincy and her aunt. "What are you saying?" "He's your father, Rose," Harriet said softly. "The rancher your mother loved, the one she tried to find after you were born." Rose stood abruptly, her face flushed. "That's not possible. My father abandoned us." "He didn't want—" "No," Quincy interrupted, pain evident in his voice. "I never knew about you, Rose. Your grandfather sent your mother away before she could tell me she was expecting. I searched for her for years, but I couldn't find her." "And she searched for you," Harriet added. "But by then, you'd already moved west." Rose shook her head, backing toward the door. "Why are you telling me this now, after 15 years? "Because fate finally brought us together," Quincy said, rising but not approaching her. "I never stopped loving your mother, Rose. And I would have loved you from the moment I knew of your existence, if only I'd been given the chance." "I need air," Rose said, turning and rushing out the front door. Harriet moved to follow, but Quincy placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Let me." He found Rose by the corral, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared at the horses in the fading light. He approached slowly, making sure she heard his footsteps. "I used to dream about him," Rose said without turning around. "My father. I imagined what he might look like, what his voice would sound like." She finally faced Quincy, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I never thought I'd actually meet him." "I dreamed too," Quincy admitted, "about your mother, about the life we might have had together. I never knew to dream about you, but if I had." His voice caught. You would have been exactly as you are, strong, kind, with your mother's eyes and her way with horses." Rose wiped away a tear. "She told me stories about you. She called you her handsome rancher. Said you could gentle the wildest stallion with just your voice." Quincy smiled at the memory. "She exaggerated. It was your mother who had the true gift with animals, and with people. She could see right into a person's heart." "She kept a locket," Rose said, reaching beneath her collar to pull out a small silver pendant, "with a tiny sketch of you inside. She said it was drawn by a traveling artist who passed through your town." She opened it to reveal a miniature portrait of a much younger Quincy. He stared at it, transported back to that day. "The county fair, summer of 1862. Rebecca insisted we get our portraits done, even though it cost nearly a week's wages. She wore it every day," Rose said, closing the locket carefully, "even when she was ill at the end." They stood in silence for a moment, the shared memory of Rebecca hanging between them. "What happens now?" Rose finally asked. "That depends," Quincy replied. "The fair moves on soon and you with it." Rose nodded slowly. "It's all I've ever known. Aunt Harriet the troupe traveling from town to town." "And it's a good life," Quincy acknowledged. "I wouldn't ask you to leave it, but I would like to know you, Rose, to be part of your life in whatever way you'll allow." "And if I wanted to stay?" Rose asked tentatively. "Not right away, perhaps, but someday." Quincy's heart leaped. "There would always be a place for you here. This land, these horses, they're your birthright as much as they are mine." For the first time that evening, Rose smiled. "I'd like to get to know you too. My mother loved you very much. I'd like to understand why." The next week passed in a whirlwind of shared stories and discoveries. Quincy showed Rose every aspect of the ranch, taught her about his breeding program for quarter horses, and shared stories of her mother that even Harriet hadn't heard. Rose, in turn, demonstrated her remarkable skills with horses and told him about her life on the road. Harriet watched their budding relationship with careful eyes that gradually softened as she witnessed Quincy's genuine care for his newly found daughter. 3 days before the fair was scheduled to depart, Harriet sought Quincy out alone. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble, "about Rose's future." Quincy set down the bridle he'd been repairing. "As have I. She's flourishing here," Harriet observed. "I've never seen her so excited, so engaged. Your horsemanship program intrigues her." "She has exceptional instincts," Quincy agreed. "Better than mine, if I'm honest." Harriet nodded thoughtfully. "The troupe will return through this territory next spring, perhaps. Perhaps Rose could stay here until then, learn the business properly, spend time with you." Quincy stared at her, scarcely believing what he was hearing. "You'd allow that?" "I'm getting older, Mr. Hale," Harriet said with a wry smile. "The constant travel grows wearying. And Rose deserves to know her father, to understand where she comes from." "I'd provide for her every need," Quincy promised. "Give her the best education money can buy." "She'd need more than that," Harriet cautioned. "She'd need patience, guidance. She's never stayed in one place for more than a few weeks, never had to put down roots." "I would do everything in my power to help her adjust," Quincy vowed. "And you would always be welcome here, Miss Harriet, always." Later that day, they presented the idea to Rose, who met it with initial shock followed by cautious excitement. "I could stay, really stay?" she asked, looking between them. "Learn about breeding horses and running a ranch, if that's what you want," Quincy confirmed. "The choice is entirely yours." Rose bit her lip, considering. "I would miss the troupe, and you, Aunt Harriet." "The troupe will survive without us for a season," Harriet said. "And I was thinking I might stay as well, at least for a time. My old bones could use a rest from constant travel." Rose's face lit up. "You'd stay too, if Mr. Hale is amenable," Harriet replied, glancing at Quincy. "More than amenable," Quincy assured them both. Delighted. The decision made, preparations began in earnest. The fair would move on as scheduled, but Harriet and Rose would remain behind. Word spread quickly through the small community of Copper Creek, and Quincy found himself fielding curious questions about the girl who so resembled him around the eyes. He answered truthfully but simply, Rose was his daughter, previously unknown to him, and he was blessed to have found her after so many years apart. The night before the fair's departure, a small gathering was held to bid farewell to Rose's friends in the troupe. Quincy watched as she moved among them, exchanging tearful hugs and promises to reunite in the spring. Despite the difficulty of the parting, he could see the excitement in her eyes when she glanced his way. After the guests had departed, Rose approached him on the porch where he sat watching the stars come out. "May I join you?" she asked. "Always," Quincy replied, gesturing to the chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Rose spoke again. "I found something today while packing my things," she said, reaching into her pocket. "Mother's journal. I've read it many times, but there was one passage I thought you might like to hear." Quincy nodded, not trusting his voice. Rose opened the small leather-bound book to a marked page and read. "I dreamed of Quincy again last night. In my dream, he found Rose and me in a meadow full of wildflowers. He lifted her high in the air, and she laughed with such joy that birds took flight around them. I wake from these dreams with both sorrow and hope. Sorrow that what might have been never came to pass, but hope that somehow, someday, fate might be kind enough to bring father and daughter together, even if I cannot be there to witness it." Tears streamed freely down Quincy's weathered face. "She always did believe in fate. So did you find what you were looking for out west?" Rose asked softly. "The lasting thing you wanted to build?" Quincy looked at his daughter, at the ranch spread out before them, at the life he'd carved from wilderness and determination. "I built something, yes. But it wasn't lasting until now." He reached out hesitantly, and when she didn't pull away, covered her hand with his own. "Now it has someone to last for." Over the following months, Rose and Harriet settled into life at the Hale Ranch. Rose proved to be a natural with the horses, developing training techniques that even Quincy's most experienced hands admired. Harriet revealed an unexpected talent for bookkeeping, bringing order to Quincy's haphazard accounting system and identifying several profitable opportunities he'd overlooked. As winter gave way to spring and spring blossomed into summer, the three of them formed a family unlike any Quincy had dared to imagine. Rose's initial caution gave way to genuine affection, and the first time she called him father, Quincy felt his heart might burst with joy. The traveling fair returned as promised the following spring. Rose greeted her old friends with enthusiasm, but showed no signs of wanting to rejoin them on the road. Instead, she proudly showed off the colt she'd helped train and the riding school she and Quincy were establishing for local children. On a warm evening in June, as they sat watching fireflies dance over the pasture, Rose asked the question that had been lingering between them. "Do you think Mother would be happy with how things turned out?" Quincy considered for a moment. "I think she would be overjoyed to see you flourishing, to know that we found each other against all odds." He smiled at his daughter. "She always believed things happened for a reason, even the painful things." "Like being separated from you," Rose mused. "Like that," Quincy agreed. "Though I'll never understand why it had to be that way." "Perhaps so you could build all this," Rose suggested, gesturing to the ranch around them. "So there would be something waiting for me when we finally found each other." The wisdom in her words struck Quincy profoundly. "You sound just like her." "Good," Rose said with a smile. "I want to be like her and like you too." "You're better than both of us," Quincy assured her. "You're the best of us combined." As summer faded into autumn, Harriet announced her intention to stay permanently. She'd received an offer to teach at the local school, her knowledge from years of self-education finally finding a formal outlet. Quincy was delighted, having come to value not only her practicality but her quiet companionship during the long evenings. And on a crisp October morning, exactly 18 months after Rose had ridden into his life at the fairground, Quincy Hale stood beside his daughter as she demonstrated a new training technique to potential buyers from as far away as Denver. As applause broke out at the conclusion of her presentation, Quincy caught Harriet's eye across the corral and saw in her smile a reflection of his own contentment. Later that evening, as they sat together in the parlor that now held portraits of Rebecca alongside photographs of their growing family, Rose raised her cup in a toast. "To fate," she said, "for bringing us together against impossible odds." "To your mother," Quincy added, "who never gave up hoping." "And to new beginnings," Harriet concluded, "even when they come later than expected." Outside, the Wyoming wind sang through the cottonwoods, carrying with it the promise of winter and beyond that, another spring. On the mantelpiece, Rebecca's locket lay open beside a framed sketch of Quincy and Rose with their horses, a testament to love lost and found again in the most unexpected of ways. And in that moment, Quincy knew with absolute certainty that some dreams, no matter how long deferred, were destined to be fulfilled even if the path to them wound through 15 years of separation, and a chance encounter at a traveling fairground under the vast Wyoming sky.